work tremendously hard to recover from an eating disorder, you enter into what is known as the maintenance stage. The maintenance stage is where you are sustaining and maintaining those adaptive behaviors that support your well-being. I want to say that some people talk about being recovered and other people talk about being in remission. And it doesn't really matter which you prefer to use. My own personal opinion is I like to think of an eating disorder as going into remission, very similar to someone who has survived cancer. That, it's gone away and we hope it goes away forever and you never have to deal with it again. But you do just have to be a little mindful of those red flags or those signs and symptoms that might indicate you're having a setback. So what I want you to do is I want you to be able to see the train coming off the tracks miles away so that you get it back on so you can continue on your journey and enjoy life. In order to do that, we need to define the difference between a lapse and a relapse. So our goal is to not fall into relapse, but to lapse and catch those lapses very early. Lapses are to be expected and they're a completely normal part of changing your behavior. Whether you're trying to quit smoking or to get up earlier in the day, it's inevitable that you're going to have some slips. It's a part of the process. Perfection doesn't exist, and if you've done the hard work with your eating disorder, you know that the goal is to be perfectly imperfect, and so it's a completely normal thing to have happen. Having a lapse is an opportunity to learn, because when you have a lapse, you can really put a magnifying glass on it, see if there's some new tools you need to learn to solidify those old behaviors, and figure out what your motivators are. The danger is not that a lapse happens, it's how you perceive that lapse and how you rebound and recover from it. Let's talk about some of those red flags or those signs that you may be having a lapse. So one of the most common ones is, of course, a change in your eating. So if you notice that your portion sizes are getting smaller, or perhaps they're getting bigger, maybe you're eating less frequently throughout the day, maybe you're finding you're avoiding certain foods, or you're less likely to go out with friends to a restaurant, you isolate a little bit more. Also, if you notice perhaps your alcohol consumption increases, or if you're someone that uses other drugs, are you starting to pick those up as well? Be attuned to some of the emotions you may be having. If you notice you're having negative feelings such as shame, guilt, anxiety, after you eat, in anticipation of eating, or feeling nervous about eating out in public, that might be a sign that you're headed towards a lapse. Are you picking up those magazines? Are you starting to follow people on Instagram or Facebook? Individuals who the primary focus is on weight, shape, dieting? Be very mindful that you're not leaning towards those aspects of social media. Are you becoming a little more preoccupied with food? Are you thinking about it more? Are you planning out your meals with more detail? It's pretty normal that we think about food and we have to shop for groceries, but you know the difference between that and starting to become obsessive about your eating experiences. Be careful if you start to go underground. What I mean by that is when you start to conceal things from your loved ones. I don't want to say lying because it's not that, but some feelings of shame might cause you to share less with the people around you. Be careful in the amount of frequency you're using the mirror or body checking. So if you're finding you're spending more time in front of the mirror and really focusing in on certain body parts, or doing that body checking to figure out size, that's something to be really careful of, as well as if you're someone who uses the scale. If you use a scale, which there's different opinions about whether a person should use a scale in the recovery process or in the maintenance stage or in life in general, but if you are someone who uses it to appropriately monitor being in a weight range that is suitable for you, if that number starts to go consistently down, if the number starts to go consistently up, you really want to compare that with your food intake and see if there's something that you need to catch. Also, are you picking up that Fitbit? Are you signing up to apps like FitnessPal? with what you might tell yourself is good intention, those can be very dangerous things to pick up when you're in the maintenance stage. Notice whether or not you're comparing yourself a little more with others. Are you judging how you look? Are you questioning every outfit you put on? And really comparing yourself to the others as to whether or not you're good enough. Also, urges. You know what an urge feels like and the experience of having that, whether it's an urge to exercise, to vomit, to binge, to restrict. Urges are a telltale sign that there's something going on. So also be mindful of the physical things that could be happening. Are you having difficulty sleeping? Are you having energy levels that are changing? Is your mood fluctuating? Is someone telling you you're a little bit more irritable than you normally are? Are you starting to micromanage your life? So we know that perfectionism can often be a style that individuals with eating disorders have. So just keep in mind, are you spending that extra little amount of time on a project? Are you reading and rereading an email before you send it out? Are you thinking and ruminating about what you're going to say at a party for fear of being judged? And then lastly, life events. This is a really preventative thing to be mindful of in regards to the maintenance stage. Life events, whether they are positive or negative, can really throw a wrench in the recovery process. So things like divorce, loss of a loved one, even a wedding. I've had clients I've worked with that we've really had to coach and plan out how they're going to do their wedding because the spotlight is on them. They're wearing a gown or a suit, and the event involves food and involves people looking at them a lot. So something a lot of us are fortunate to do is go on vacations. And one thing to be careful of is if you go on a beach vacation, because that can be a high-risk experience for someone who's in remission and recovery. So what do you do when you notice a lapse is occurring? First and foremost, be prepared. It is normal. I actually think it's weird if someone doesn't have a lapse when they're in the maintenance stage. So recognize it as an absolutely normal, expected part of the process. And of course, try to stay positive and calm. This is something you can navigate. You've worked hard and you have a tremendous amount of tools, and this is very doable. Identify what the trigger is. Usually when there's a lapse, there's something going on in your environment, whether it's an interpersonal interaction you had, maybe it's a change of jobs, but there's something that might be triggering a lapse occurring, or maybe the perfect storm of a couple of things. So try to identify that and see it as a learning opportunity, a chance to learn new skills and acquire some more information for yourself. Refresh your motivators and your long-term goals. You have come an amazing way in your recovery and being in the maintenance stage. And it's important to think about what recovery means to you. So those can be your motivators in living life and getting back your life when you have a lapse. And then lastly, take control. Take control in a good way and pick up some of those concrete strategies that worked really well for you before. So let's talk about some of those concrete strategies, the ones that I've found to be most useful for the clients I've worked with over the years. So definitely meal planning. One of the first things you can do is to get back to planning those meals the day before, or if you're with your parents, the week before. And the reason why we do that is, if you remember, we want to disconnect the emotional experience around eating. Otherwise, you're going to wake up in the morning and feel a certain way about your body, and then that's going to dictate what you're going to eat. So if we switch that and plan the meals ahead of time, what you're going to eat, when you're going to eat, and work really hard to eat according to your meal plan, that will help you to develop those normalized patterns again. Of course, track those meals. So after you've meal planned, track to see if you've actually eating according to your plan. We actually call that robotic eating and mechanical eating. Yes, it might not be very enjoyable, but it's going to help you stay safe and normalize those eating patterns. The same holds true for activity. So you can even plan and track your activity. What I mean by that is if you're someone who is going to do activity on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, plan what it is, plan how long you're going to be active, and see if you can stick to that plan. So by the way, if you do plan your activity, let's say on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or you plan to be active 3 days a week, but for whatever reason, one day you wake up and you don't feel like being active that day, it's really important that you don't make that up on another day. If you don't feel like doing it, just don't do it. It's okay. As I said earlier, there's different opinions about whether using a weigh scale during the recovery and maintenance stage. If you're having a lapse, some people find it very beneficial to track their weight. Just ensure you're doing that in an appropriate fashion, or make sure you're using the help of a healthcare professional to do so. Also, of course, if you're someone, part of that lapse is using alcohol or drugs, try to get some support to really diminish, minimize, get rid of entirely, because those things can certainly make it more difficult to maintain the recovery process. Revisit your resources. I'm sure most of you have a binder or a folder with handouts that have strategies and information in order for you to refresh those things that were really helpful to you in recovery. Reach out to a friend, talk to your parents. If you are involved in a peer support or maybe a support group, don't hesitate to access those again. Secrets keep you sick, so reach out. If you've educated the people around you that lapses are a completely normal and expected part of the process, they're not going to be surprised when you need to reach out to them for support. And lastly, a rule of thumb is do the opposite of what your eating disorder brain is telling you to do, because chances are you'll be headed on the right track if you do so. I wanted to speak to one of those life transitions that a lot of young men and women go through after they've done recovery from an eating disorder, and that is they go off to post-secondary, college, university. That can actually increase the risk that you may have a lapse. So some things to think about when you're planning on going off to university. Choose your school with recovery maintenance in mind. So are you someone that feels more supported in a small school, a larger school? Are there healthcare services available at the school, counseling services, an on-site physician? Do they offer healthcare benefits? These are some of the things you want to keep in mind. Also, are you living close to home or far away from home? Which is going to be more advantageous to you? Be realistic with your schedule. I know you might want to finish earlier, or you might want to match the course load of your friends, but know that it's really important for you to practice that self-care and just to pay attention to what you need to be successful. And if that means taking 1 or 2 courses a semester, so be it. I promise you, you won't remember that 10 or 20 years from now. Set up your resources before. I can't tell you how common it is to go off to university and then have a lapse and not be ready for it and not have the resources available. I hope you're not going to need them, but plan them ahead of time just in case. Who is your family physician going to be? Do you have a mental health therapist? Who's your dietitian? You got to have these people on speed dial so they're there when you need it. If I had to choose one healthcare practitioner that I think would be most important when you're going off to university, I would choose a registered dietitian. The reason why is your experience with food is going to change when you're at university. You might have different appliances in your apartment. You might be living in residence. There's different grocery stores around you. There's different food kiosks on campus. So if you work with a registered dietitian ahead of time, they can really help you plan what to do when you're running from class to class and you don't have a lot of time, or you don't have the appliances in your house to make the meals that you would normally make back home. And then brainstorm potential challenges. Work with your therapist or someone you trust to think about the things that might pop up that could be obstacles in your way. And if you know what those challenges might be and you problem solve, you're going to be ready to navigate them beautifully when you go off to school. When you're in the maintenance stage, I want you to enjoy life. I don't want you to have to think about your former eating disorder a whole lot, but I do want you to just give it a little bit of time and thought once a while. So again, you can catch that train coming off the tracks miles in advance. If you're someone who is in need on accessing a new healthcare practitioner, please feel free to go to the Silver Linings Foundation website, and under the resource section is titled Finding a Specialist. And there you can learn about what questions to ask, what's the difference between the different healthcare providers, so you can find a great fit the first time.